All right, team. Good morning, everyone. We're gonna get started. I think there's still a few people joining in, but I'll just right. I'll jump right into it. So thanks everybody for joining. I'll let you all know that we're gonna be recording the session. So if you want to review anything afterwards, you will be able to do so. And if you need to step out earlier, you can do so. But we'd prefer if you guys can stick around and ask questions and make sure that we get everything answered on this session. We want to make sure that everybody is on the same page and we're all doing the same throughout the recruitment process to make sure that everything is as efficient and just and effective for every single candidate. So I sent out a link to everybody. So if you're on a computer, you'll be able to join the documents as we go through them. I will, however, share my screen so that you guys can follow the documents that way as well. I'll ask everybody to mute yourself unless you want to ask a question or whatnot, and obviously remove your video so that the call is a little bit more. We have no issues with the connectivity. Alrighty, so I'll start with the screening guidelines, which is called Screening Guidelines YDC Delegations 2018 on the folder I shared with you guys. But again, I'll show it here on my screen. So the reason we changed our process a little bit is because last year we did a survey, as some of you may recall, and we gathered information and opinions of how we were doing our recruitment process, and we realized that we could improve on a couple points. One of the main ones was how we were assessing the candidates through the pre-screening process and the interview process. So one of the major changes was what we're actually looking for in a candidate, and we're going to review that right now. So just as a general outline, our recruitment process, as you all know, has two main steps: the online application and then the interview. So the pre-screening process, it's specifically when we review all the applicants that we have from the online application. And for this, we use a matrix, which we'll be reviewing right now as well. So basically, I'll show you the matrix very quickly. We'll go through it a bit more in detail in a second. But in the matrix, for those of you who have done pre-screening in the past, this is where we have all the information that we gather from the online application. We'll go through every single one in a second. But you'll see the main changes of the process reflected here from column A to H. These are the new 7 criteria points that we're going to be reviewing, and we'll come back to this in just a second. But so if you are assigned to one of the candidates or a number of candidates in the pre-screening process through the matrix, this is a process you're going to have to follow. So just first, some general guidelines. Each column and category is assessed with a simple 1 to 5 scale, where 1 is the lowest and 5 is the highest. And in just a second, I'll tell you specifically or in more detail what we are looking for on a 1 and on a 5 mark. It is recommended not to give, to give 4 for answers that you believe are well above average, of course. Please only give 5 to a small number of candidates and aim to give 5 to less than 10% of your marks or candidates. It's very common for our assessment to see quite a bit of 4 and 5s, which makes it a little bit more difficult to find the top 10% of candidates that we want to interview, which is roughly the percentage that we pre-screen for the interview process. And feel comfortable giving out 3s to candidates. That's completely okay, and those that are acceptable. And most marks should be within the range of 2 to 4. Reviewing a good profile should take you about 3 to 4 minutes. However, try to be as efficient with your time as possible. We recommend reviewing steps 1 to 5 quickly in order to determine if that profile is worth assessing in detail. You don't have to review the whole application if you, at the beginning or from a first glance, believe that that applicant won't make the top percent, or is not at the level that we expect for candidates. So screening steps. There's a few things that we're going to be doing prior to opening up the matrix to all the panel, so that it has a pre-screening step in addition to the one you're going to be doing. This includes their age, their nationality, and so on. But we ask you to review that again when you look at the candidate, just to make sure that we don't miss any. So the first step for eligibility is age requirement. For YDC applicants must be from 18 to 29 years old for the spring delegations. They need to be Canadian citizens, so please check the nationality column when you're reviewing the applicants. The following columns must be answered and filled. If no information is given, the candidate will not be considered. This is very important because it could be a star, it could be your champion candidate, but if he or she does not have these columns filled, he or she won't be eligible. So these are the requirements we have. So the personal statement, the YouTube video, that has to be in duplication, and the answers to question 1 to 3, which is the delegation specific question, the personal background question, and the networking skills question. If the candidate is not eligible, so if they are missing any of the above, or they don't meet one of the conditions on number 1 and 2, please just add a number 1 on the total column, which is the column that pretty much adds all the grades that you put in for that candidate. That way we know that that person is not eligible. Now, this is just for your information, because you won't have to know the question specifically. But we will have 3 different questions in every single one of our online applications. The first one is assessing technical knowledge and of the scopes of candidates' role in the main topics being discussed at the forum. Obviously, once you're given a number of candidates to pre-screen, you will have to go online and look at the application, read that question, although it will be shown on the application as well, and get familiar with the question, so that you can assess the answer a little bit better. So that's question 1. Question 2, again, in all of the 3 delegations, it would be the same. The question 2 will be assessing the candidate's experience and skills, and we'll review what experiences and skills we're looking for in a second. And question 3, again, in a very similar format for all 3 delegations, we'll be assessing all skills, understanding the role, and ability to think strategically of each candidate. Now, that gives you a little bit of context. Now, the actual information that you need to know. So, out of the survey that we conducted, there's 6 different skills that we think are the top features or skills that the candidate must have as a YDC delegate. The first one is interpersonal skills. Second one would be cross-cultural competence. Third, diligence and motivation. Fourth, leadership and energy. Then teamwork. And lastly, technical knowledge. So we did not reflect through our criteria directly all these 6 skills. However, we have incorporated them into 7 different criteria sets. So the first one is education, and this will be your guide once you're doing the pre-screening. This is how you know what 1 point means and what 5 points mean when you're assessing that candidate. So a quick example, or I'll give you the 7 7 points of our criteria first. So the first one is education. The second one is motivation and quality of application. The third one is leadership and teamwork. And the fourth, technical knowledge. Fifth, youth and international activities. Sixth, video. And seventh, target group. So I won't go through all of them right now, just through the first and the last one. The rest are pretty much the same the way we are assessed, but I would ask you to review them and have a look at what we're asking for 1, 3, and 5 points. Obviously, it's up to your analysis and assessment, what 2 would be and a 4 would be. We did not include them here. We just gave you a range of the grading criteria that we're using, right? So, for example, in education, you will give 1 point if no graduate degree has been completed, and or if the studies are not relevant to the themes of the summit. So, for example, if you're assessing somebody for the Y7, which is focused this year on the future of employment and how youth is going to be moving towards that, and they studied engineering, which won't necessarily be as directly related to the theme of the summit, unless they did a specialization that may relate to something related to skills or whatnot. Perhaps that will be a 1 on the assessment form. A 3 would be an undergrad completed, and it's relevant to the themes of the summit. And 5 points would be an undergraduate or graduate degree focused on the themes of the summit. So it's pretty straightforward, but what we did here that it's different from before is we have narrowed down specifically what we want to see in the assessment and how that relates to the criteria. So the other next 5 points are pretty much the same in terms of the range. Please again review them. I'll focus now on the target group. So on this one, there's only 2 points that you can give out, either 0 or 2 points. This point here, target group, what we're trying to do is to ensure that we're giving some help to certain groups or minority groups that are usually not represented either on the interview steps of our process. We did an analysis of who we have selected for the interview steps, and obviously in our delegations. Again, we did an analysis of our delegates in the last couple of years, and what we found is that these groups, or what we're trying to target here, are the groups that we're just not representing as much, and we want to make sure that they get a little bit of an advantage or an extra couple points to make sure that they have a better probability of getting into the interview steps of the process. So 0 points if you're not included in any of the following groups, and if you're included in any of the following groups, then we will give them out 2 points. And I'll show you in just a second where and how you put in these 2 points. So if you're between the ages of 18 to 22 years old, which might seem a large range, but in reality, most of our delegates are over 22, so we want to make sure that we push this type of applicants. The second would be from the provinces of Manitoba, New Brunswick, Northwest Territories, Nova Scotia, Nunavut, Prince Edward Island, Saskatchewan, and Yukon. There might be others that you think that are usually not represented at these type of events or delegations, but the reality is that we have selected people from those provinces, so we are not pushing for those as much. Then gender, we considered including women here. However, we have a pretty strong gender balance in that regard through our delegations. We, however, want to push the LGBTQ2 community. So if they openly specified that they consider themselves part of the community, then that means that we can provide them with those 2 points. And minority groups, we will only include Indigenous people in this one. And again, there's a column where you can find this information in the matrix. I'll show you in just a second. One clarification here is, if you're a 19-year-old from Manitoba and you're from one of the Indigenous groups, it doesn't mean that you get 6 points. It only means that you get 2 points. So you only get 2 points if you consider yourself as a candidate a part of any or of one or several of these groups. So next steps. The recruitment team will select the top candidates based on their total score. Generally, we'll select the top 10% to go into the interviews. However, the recruitment team will review these candidates' profiles and will decide who to offer an interview, taking into consideration geographical, linguistic, gender, and ethnicity. This is done in order to ensure that we have a diverse, representative, and targeted selection of candidates. The number of candidates chosen for an interview will depend on the amount of applications received and the size of our recruitment panel. Now, perhaps you found a few very strong candidates that you thought would have an interview because they got the highest mark. This does not necessarily mean that they're going to go into the interview process. Again, we try to keep it as fair and competitive as possible, but we also need to be mindful of the diversity in our delegation, and obviously the diversity in the candidates that we're pushing for an interview. So just keep that in mind. Alrighty, so that's the first document, the screening guidelines. I'm going to go very quickly through the matrix, which basically it's the document that you're going to utilize to reflect everything that I just mentioned. So if you're following me on my screen, then this is the document we're looking at. If not, on your computer, you can go into the Recruitment Matrix 2018 sample, which is found on the folder that I shared with you guys. So on this document, you'll see that column A to H, those are the criteria that we just covered. So education, motivation, and quality of application, leadership, technical knowledge, and so on. If you just put your mouse over the field, say education, I have added comments with the criteria of how to assess from 1 to 5, so that you can refer to that when you're assessing the candidate without having to go back to the document we were just reviewing. And what we're going to be doing now, I'm just going to show you the information that you see on this document when you are assessing candidates. So this is an actual candidate that has applied in the past. We just changed the name. So basically you'll see obviously their basic information from name to contact details, nationality, age, and so on, education. You will also find the links to obviously their LinkedIn profile, Twitter, perhaps Facebook or a personal website, their Skype ID, and obviously their link to their YouTube video, or their personal statement, that is, as we call it. You will also find if they express interest to be a head delegate or a communications coordinator. I'll go over that in just a second. And you'll find the answers to their 3 questions. So what I would do for this candidate first would be, obviously, as we mentioned before, check their age, 24, so good. They don't get any extra points for target group based on age. I want to check where this person is from. They're Canadian, so perfect, they're eligible. They're from Edmonton. So Alberta is not considered part of the target group, so they don't get 2 extra points for this one either. Now, do you identify with or belong to any Canadian Indigenous groups? No, so no extra points in this one as well. And what I would do next is I would very quickly review their LinkedIn page to have an idea of their profile. Then I would review their personal statement, have a very quick look at that 1-minute video. Once I do that, I go into the questions. Prior to reviewing this candidate, I would have read the question for OECD, for example, here. We're asking them about technology, innovation, green growth, and sustainable development, economic growth, and international finance. So the question is basically asking what's Canada's role, and how can we approach these issues through a Canadian standpoint. I will review the answer here, obviously referring back to what I mentioned before in terms of the top skills that we're looking for. So, but basically, just you just want to make sure that they are covering the topics of the question here in a concise way, but that they're actually covering the topics that we're asking for in here. We will leave this up to your assessment and for you to consider whether or not they're covering the main questions we're asking. Then we have a question in regards to their experience. They will put in their experience on a point form. For example, here this person is president VP of their university's student union. A few interesting activities there that may be relevant to the OECD. And lastly, we asked them to provide us a strategy or an explanation of how would they approach their job or their role as delegate. If they expressed on the previous column if they want to be a head delegate or a communications coordinator. If it's a 1, it means yes. If it's a 2, it means no. But we're going to change this so that it shows yes or no, so it's easier for you guys to review. If they answer yes to either one of the or both of the roles of communications coordinator or heads delegate, this question here, the third question on their application, must address how and why they're good for either of these positions. So through their strategy of how to be a delegate, or through their answer of how they would conduct their activities. If they ask to be considered for head delegate or communications coordinator, they should be mentioned somehow here. If it's communications coordinator and they're mentioning social media and how they would do a campaign, that's good. If they're head delegates and they comment on how they have supervised people in the past, obviously that's something we're looking for, right? Now, the way you assess that is once you review all this information, then you go back and you assess education, you assess the motivation and quality of the application, obviously based on your experience and based on the criteria that we provided, and the rest of the columns here. So basically, that's how you're going to be doing the pre-screening. Again, it should take you about 3 to 5 minutes, around 3 minutes to review each candidate. We will be allocating, say, between 5 and 10 candidates, depending on the volume, really. But basically, you'll be reviewing these candidates, and then we'll see if we move forward. But basically, once you input all the... Oh, we haven't done the... Sorry, here. Let me just do it very quickly. So once you put in all the grades, obviously we'll have the total, and based on this total is that we're going to be able to determine whether or not they move forward to an interview. And just to remind you guys, again, if that candidate is not eligible, just on this age column, the total column, you just go and add 1, and it would be very easy for us to identify that this candidate is not eligible and should not be considered. And we actually will hide that column once we do the debriefing and select the top 10%. So that's the pre-screening process. I would like to open for questions if you have any. We'll have a few minutes before we start the next session. So go ahead, if anybody has any questions, please feel free.
Hi, Diego. This is Macarena here. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks, Macarena.
I do have a question actually regarding the nationality. Do permanent residents count, or does it really need to be Canadian citizen?
As of now, Macarena, we will only consider for spring week delegations based on our policy, which is accessible online on the FAQs, Canadian citizens. Permanent residents, it's something that we strive to include, and we will do so in the future, we hope. However, we do have the limitation sometimes, either from Y7 or Y20, depending on the host country, for citizens only. And another issue, which perhaps does not apply for the Y7 this year, but we wanted to continue with the same policy, it's a matter of coordinating visas. Since we have no control on whether or not the permanent resident, based on their country of origin, will require a visa for either Switzerland or France or the US for the educational delegations, then that means that we're not able to accept them, because if we have such a tight application process and selection process that we wouldn't have enough time to support them with their visas.
That is perfect. Thank you so much for the clarification.
Thank you, Macarena. Anybody else?
Just one point to add, Diego, it's Ross.
Mm-hmm.
And your point about citizens, entirely fair. That's not actually in the FAQs.
Thank you, Russell. I'll double check that. I'm not sure if it's on the FAQs or the website. We'll double check that information.
Hi, Sophia here.
Hi, Sophia.
Just a question about the screening guidelines for education. It says 3 points. They get 3 points if their undergrad is completed. and then 5 points if it's either an undergrad or graduate degree.
Mm-hmm.
So it just seems like there's a little bit of an overlap. So I'm wondering, in what instance would you give them 5 points if they have an undergraduate degree versus 3 points if they have an undergrad completed?
Say if they're going to the OECD and they studied international studies as an undergraduate, I would consider that as relevant and provide them with a 3. I would, in most cases, only give 5 if they have a postgraduate degree that is specific to the topics of the summit. However, we included undergraduate in there just in case they had perhaps a certification on top of their undergraduate, or if they had a minor that was specialized on, say, economic development, or we just wanted to give it a little bit more flexibility to the 5, not to exclude people who are younger and are still studying their or just completed their undergraduate. But if it's just an undergraduate that is relevant to the summit, go for the standard 3 points. If you see that they did a little bit extra undergraduate, and that is relevant for the summit, perhaps they did a dual degree, or they had again a minor that complemented their undergraduate degree, then we would be comfortable having a 5 points for that one. Does that answer your question?
Okay, great. Is it possible to maybe add in a little comment about that?
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah,
and maybe give an example of disciplines just so we're consistent in that regard?
Definitely.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thanks.
Hey Diego, it's Nick.
Hey, Nick.
It was a little nitpicky thing, and I'm happy to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But in the schedule an assessment form under the applications tab, is it okay if I wrap the text for all of the grid? Just because I find that when you put in all of the information from the application, then the text it's like a preview, and then it goes horizontal, and I find it kind of confusing when I'm looking through applications. So if I can just wrap it, then it would just all kind of show vertically.
Yeah.
That makes any. Okay.
Yeah, go for it. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
Alrighty. If there's no further questions regarding the pre-screening, then I'll jump right away into the interview session. Give me just 1 second. I'm just going to connect with Sarah here because she's going to be doing the second part of the session. Give me just 2 seconds, guys, and I'll be back. All right, let's get started with the second session then. Just to recap, we just reviewed the pre-screening step of our process. Now we're going to cover the second step, which is the interviewing process. Everything will come together in the end. But basically, what we've done again on the interviewing step of the process is reflect those top skills that I mentioned at the beginning. I'll review them later in this session for those who just joined. But basically, what we did is we reflected those top skills into our assessment and the questions that we're going to be asking in the interview. So for those who have done interviews in the past, the process itself, it's pretty similar. It's just the essence of the questions and how we're going to be assessing those questions that really changed. And because of or since many of you who have been part of the process before and participated in the survey asked for some sort of guideline or rubric, as we just developed as well for the pre-screening process. Since you guys asked for that, we developed one for this one as well, with more specific details on what we're looking for on each answer of the interview, so that it is easier for you guys to assess and grade the candidates. So we're going to be reviewing very quickly, really, 5 elements for the interviewing training session. The first one will be the interview schedule, which I'll show you in a second. The second would be the interview questions, which we won't cover in detail. I'll just give you the essence of what we're going to be covering on each one of them. The third would be the assessment rubric. Again, that is a new tool that we developed for you guys to have as a reference point when you're assessing candidates' answers. Then the assessment form, which is where you are actually going to reflect these grades. This continues as before, so it's the same format. And lastly, we're going to go through the recruitment guidelines, which is really the tool that you're going to be using. You're going to be able to find all the links to the different tools and documents that you're going to be using during the interview. It gives you step-by-step how we're going to do the process. So again, I'm going to first just go through the documents, show you what they look like so that you're familiar with them, because there's 4 of them. And it can get a little bit confusing if we jump into the guidelines without reviewing the documents first. And obviously, in the end, I'll go through the guidelines. That would be the bigger part of the session, step by step, as to how you're going to do the interviews. So let's start first with the recruitment schedule. So on this document, which again would be familiar for those of you who have done this in the past, because we kept it as it was before, you're going to be able to find both the availability and, most importantly, the allocation of interviews that we're going to be doing for the delegations. So the first step here, and I'll review this on the guidelines in just a second, would be we're going to be asking you guys through the week, next week, to add your availability and your Skype ID so that we have the information of all the panelists. The reason for this is that obviously we need to allocate the interviews, and the way we do this, we allocate a candidate to 2 panelists. So there's 2 panelists running each interview. Just as a reference, we try to keep this 1 executive of YDC or 1 staff from YDC and 1 alumni per interview. This way we have a more I guess, diverse analysis of or assessment of the answers and each profile. And so once we send out this request, we're going to ask you guys to go on into this document, and in the same way that we have here, we're going to ask you to add your name, your Skype ID, and then pretty much just copy paste the available text into those times where you're going to be available for the interview. So basically, you're going to see to the left on column A, the date of the 3 days that we have for interviewing, then the times broken down by 30 minutes each slot. And if you scroll down, you're going to see the second date, the third date, and so on. At the end of the sessions or the interview days, you're going to find at 4 p.m. on a Sunday the debriefing section or the debriefing session. I'll explain you what this means, but basically you gotta make sure, or I would invite everybody to please make time to be available at this time, because that's when we're gonna be selecting the candidates, and it's much better if we have everybody available and everybody participates in that session to make sure that we select the right individuals for the delegations. So once you add the availability, you're gonna see, and this is a thing that some people get confused with sometimes, you're going to see the name of, say, John Doe on one of your availabilities or one of your slots. And you're going to see that the name is going to be repeated twice. This means that, for example, in this case, John Doe is going to be interviewed by Olivia and by Max at obviously 2:30. And you have John Doe on Max's column bolded. This means that Max is going to be facilitating or speaking during the interview. And this means that Olivia For John Doe, she's only going to be taking notes and it's going to be on the background. She can say hello and introduce herself at the beginning, but basically Max is going to be responsible of leading the interview. That's what bolded name means. So if the name is bolded on your column, you are going to be facilitating, introducing yourself and the team, and asking the questions to the candidate. And if it's not bolded, you're going to be taking the notes and making sure that the assessment form has your comments. I'll show you in just a second what that means. Alrighty, so that's the interview schedule. That's how you know who's going to be part of your interviews. Obviously, you have the Skype ID here because since you're going to be doing this in couples, you're going to have to add that second person into the call. What we encourage to do, although you can do it differently, but in order to keep it as efficient and straightforward for everybody, if you are facilitating the interview and speaking during the interview, which means that the name is bolded on your column, then you're responsible of adding the candidate into the call and your colleague into the call as well. So you're responsible for the interview basically, and the second person is there to support and do notes. So that's the first document that I'm showing you guys. The second would be the second tab of this document. This is the assessment form. Obviously, there's no information here, but basically, this is the main tool you're going to be using through the interview. It has the first column with the candidate's name. We're going to be inputting that information based on our selection. And then, obviously, the scoring column for question 1, 2, 3, and 4. And a column for notes as well. So again, the person who's supporting the call and only doing notes, they're going to be inputting the information here. I recommend putting in obviously your own comments. The second person in the interview just inputting their comments as a reference. And then once you do the interview, and we'll go over these steps in more detail in just a second. But once you're finished the interview, you can do a debriefing session with your colleague, review the notes, and then actually put in the score that you want to give that answer. But this is again the resource where you're going to be putting all the information. At the end of the document, we have more notes that myself and Sarah are going to be using, where we give the total score and some debriefing notes, just to make sure that everything is as open and clear, and that we have information on each candidate that was assessed and interviewed as of why they were or were not selected. And obviously, in column N, you have notes from panelists. Here you can put just general comments. Perhaps the candidate was late. Perhaps they were extremely well dressed and you were impressed with their presentation. You can put all that information here for further consideration. Again, remember that at the debriefing session at the end of our interviews, every single panelist will have access to your comments. And we try to make this as collaborative and dynamic as possible, so everybody can review the candidates and be as participating as during the session as possible. So yeah, that's the main resource you're going to be using. And lastly, a very important resource, and for those who do the pre-screening of candidates and those who were on the pre-screening session of our training as well, you would be familiar with this document. It's basically the same document as the matrix that I showed you, without the assessment in here, because we don't want to. We want to make the process as unbiased as possible. So we don't want to show you the total mark or score that they receive at the pre-screening process. Perhaps you could argue that it's something that it would be useful, but we want to make sure that at the second step of the process, everybody starts with a clean slate in terms of grading, and that you're grading based on the interview questions and the interview itself, and not their online application. However, you will have access to their online application without the assessment scores, and this is what the applications tab means. Here you're going to find all the information that we reviewed before, but for those who were not part of the first session, you have all the personal information, contact information. You're going to find their Skype ID here. Obviously, you're not going to have all the applicants who apply to the delegation here, only the top 10% or the top or the individuals who we're interviewing. So again, personal information, contact information, educational information, their video. I encourage you guys to review their video before the interview, just so that you get a little bit familiar with the candidate. And most importantly, for you guys to review their answers to their questions, because one of the questions that we ask through the interview relates to their answers in the online application. So you want to take 5 minutes. It won't take you more than that. before the interview to review the profile of the candidate, so you have an idea of who you're interviewing. So just to recap, on this same document, which is called Interview Schedule and Assessment Form 2018, you're going to find the interview schedule so that you know who you're going to be interviewing and with whom, the assessment form, which is where you're going to be inputting all the information, and the applications, where you're going to find all the profiles of the candidates. So that's a second. Let's move forward. This is just for your reference and information. This is the our timeline and recruitment panel information. In the timeline, which some of you might have already seen, you have all the dates. I encourage everybody to have a look at them, because those are the dates where we're going to be interviewing, selecting, notifying, and so on. So sometimes the candidates might ask you questions in regards to this timeline. It's very common for them to ask when they're going to be hearing back from us. If they get rejected, when's that going to happen? If they get selected, when everything's going to start, when they're going to be training, when they're going to be going out to the delegations. This is where you can find this. And I believe I don't have this document, my apologies, on the folder I shared. I'll include it right after our training session in that folder as well. Now, I want to clarify something here. You'll find two different timelines. The first one is Y7, OECD, and the World Bank IMF delegations. The second one is Y20. The reason is that we have two different processes happening at the same time. Our intention is to only use YDC staff or executives for the Y20. Given the short notice that we had for this process, we had to make it a little bit shorter. So we're going to be coordinating the other three delegations through the recruitment panel, so our alumni who joined the panel. And the Y20, the intention is to do it within the YDC team, just to make everything a lot less hectic. However, there will be YDC team members also joining the Y7, OECD, and World Bank IMF. So you might be allocated, if you're YDC staff, either of these two timelines. So just get familiar with them, because again, we might be reaching out to ask for help with either one. If you're an alumni, the intention is for you to only focus on Y7, OECD, World Bank, IMF, and help out with those three delegations, because that's going to be the most hectic process. And lastly, on this document, you will also find the contact information of the entire panel. So if you want to reach out to your colleagues prior to the interview, you can do so as well. And let's move forward. So the third document that I want to show you guys is the interview questions, just so you get familiar with them. This one is basically a speech that we have written for you, and at the interview we asked you to pretty much just read what we have typed here. So without changing anything on the actual document, just go through it, read it to the candidate, and follow it. It's the best way to make sure that we have a fair process, and that everybody's given the same conditions through their interview. And we encourage you, although we would love for you to connect with the candidate, gauge with them, and understand their personality a little bit better through additional conversations. We want to make sure that we do it as effective as possible, and obviously that we don't engage with any candidates more than others. So try not to give any space for additional conversation apart from general questions. So the idea is for you to jump into the interview right away, read the introduction, which gives them a little bit of a congratulations, introduction to the instructions of the interview, and then just jump into the questions right away. So the questions that you'll see, there's basically 5 of them that you're going to be assessing. However, it might be that you will only be asking 3. This depends on whether or not the delegate expressed their interest in being a head delegate or a communications coordinator. That's question 3.1 and 3.2. So I'll review this more in detail in just a second. But that's, again, this is just for you to get familiar with this document. This is where you find the instructions and the questions. And lastly, the assessment rubric. Again, this is something that those who were part of the panel in the past asked for. What we've done here is we have given you, based on the, I believe it's the Y7, no, it's the World Bank IMF. So based on the World Bank IMF application, and this is just for you as a reference, you might be assessing somebody based for the Y7 or the OECD. We only use the World Bank and IMF as a reference here again. However, as I mentioned before, the structure of the questions is pretty much the same all across the delegation. So this will apply to every single delegation. What we have done here is we've given you on each column the 4 questions that you're going to be asking during the interview. Question 3, just to clarify, the 3.1 and 3.2, which is a head delegate specific and communications coordinator specific questions, they're pretty much the same as question 3, so the same applies on the rubric. So if you look at the second row, we have what we would consider 1 point for your assessment. So basically the candidate has demonstrated a weak or no conceptual understanding of the question, and we give you specific details based on the IMF World Bank specific question as to what we refer to 1 point for that question in here. We have bolded what we consider is the most important part. So the answer was too short, no specifics given on skills. And then we'll give you more details. For example, only spoke about academic experience with no reference on other interests and strengths. They mentioned their interest in the idea of the conference. However, they didn't elaborate or made links, for instance, to youth or show knowledge on the conference, and so on. The same happens with the question number 2, 3, and 4 for the 1 point assessment. Then if you scroll down, you'll see that the 2 points, just a general guideline. We did not provide you with guidelines for the 5 points, just for 1, 3, and 5. Again, just to give you a general guideline of what we're looking for. It's up to you to determine if their question deserves a number 2, even if we don't have specifics on the rubric. But we thought with 1, 3, and 5, you would have enough reference to determine what a 2 and a 4 would mean. And then on 3, again, just as on the first point, you'll find that we'll give you specifically what we're looking for. Say question 1, unbolded. This person did not highlight specifics, just answered the question generally speaking. And for that, we mean that they found throughout studies that the individual is interested in trade, and that trade is important connector to bring states together and reduce poverty. Academic classes that this person took have focused on global economy. This person worked for London Youth Advisory Council, for example. So that means that they are legitimately interested and experienced in this question. So again, that gives you a reference of what 3 points would mean. And lastly, just as before, 5 points, what that would mean. It is the most complete question, so you will find more information here. And yeah, so basically this document gives you again the general guidelines or rubrics of what we considered a very good or a very bad question or answer, sorry, for the questions for the interview. So I encourage you guys to review this before the interview. However, if after the interview you want to go back and just review based on your notes and the answer that they provided, you want to review really what that question should be assessed on, you can do so with this document and just have a look. Again, just have a look before the interviews through the week. If you have any questions, you think we should add something, feel free to reach out. By no means this is not something that you should follow 100%. Obviously, that's why we use alumni and YDC staff for the interviews, because we want to make sure that the assessment is done based on your experience. This is just a guideline, right? So, alrighty. So that was the first part of the interviewing training session. Again, just a review of the documents, and just to recap, we reviewed the interview schedule and the assessment form. We reviewed the timeline for our interview process. We reviewed the interview questions document, or the speech that we give you guys for the interviews. And we have reviewed the rubric for the assessment of their interview questions. Now, I know it's a little bit spotty how I've presented it so far, but I just wanted for you guys to get acquainted with those documents. Now let's jump into the recruitment guidelines. So you'll find this document again on the folder that I shared with you guys if you want to follow me through your computer. If not, then you'll find it on my screen. The name is Recruitment Guidelines Delegations 2018. I would highly encourage everybody to go back through the week into this document and read it carefully. Again, this is a step-by-step process of what you as a panelist at the interview stage of the process will have to do. So let's walk through it together. Now, reviewing profiles. Each of you will be assigned a number of candidates who you will be interviewing. Before each interview, you will have to review the application submitted by each candidate in order to know more about him or her. The main thing that you need to review are the application video, as I mentioned before, their LinkedIn profile, the answers to the application questions, and obviously also get familiar with the questions that were asked, and their Skype ID in order for you to have it quickly and add that person to the call. This information can be found on this document. Click here. This is the applications tab of the document that we just reviewed. I'll show you very quickly what that means. So this is the document I'm referring to, the applications. This is the raw information of their online application. So this link will send you to that document. Each delegation has its own application tab. So make sure you select the correct one. This might get a little bit more complex when you are interviewing, but basically this document, the interview schedule and assessment form, will have 6 tabs. Each tab will have the name of the delegation. So you'll have an OECD, World Bank IMF, and a Y7 tab. We keep everything together because we don't want to have several documents happening at the same time when we're interviewing. Everything's going to be on this document. So the day of the interviews, you're only going to be on this document, really. So going back to the guidelines, once you review the applicant's profile, you're going to have your recruitment material handy. So prior to the interview, you will have to get familiar with the interview questions, schedule, and assessment forms, as we mentioned before. So for the schedule, you will be asked this week or next week to add your availability in our interview schedule. Interviews will be allocated based on your availability. There will be always at least 2 members of the panel at each interview. If the candidate's name is bolded, it means that you're the one conducting the interview and the rest are tasked to note-taking through the interview. Note, before you interview, please check what the candidate is interviewing for as stated beside their name and ask questions based on their interview questions doc of the specific delegation. Let me go over this in detail because it might get confusing. So when you're in the interviews schedule, I kept it very simple here, but in reality, what you're going to have is, for example, Y7-John Doe. So this means that John is interviewing for Y7 and that you obviously need to be asking questions of Y7. Please be very careful of this because if you interview John Doe and you ask questions of OECD or World Bank IMF, obviously John Doe will be very confused, and if you continue through the whole process and you assess based on that, obviously that would be completely wrong. So please be very careful of this. Again, you will find the Y7, IMF, World Bank, or OECD mark before their name on the interview schedule, and obviously you will only find their name on the assessment form that corresponds to that delegation. So obviously when you find the tab for Y7, that's where you're going to find John Doe. You obviously won't find it on the OECD or World Bank IMF. So if you end up in the World Bank IMF or the OECD tabs of the assessment form and you don't find John Doe, obviously you know what's going on. So that's that point. You will also have to add your Skype ID next to your name. As I mentioned before, on the interview schedule, just besides underneath your name, so that your colleagues have it. And again, in order to access the interview schedule, just click here and the guidelines will send you right away to that document. Now, interview questions. We might, and apologies for not having these ready just yet, however, we're just finishing up the questions for each of the delegations. These might change, it's marked on yellow, but basically question number 4 will vary depending on the application's answer to question 1 of the online application, and I'll show you in a second what that means. And question 5, we recommend you do some research prior to the interviews in order to better assess the answer to this question. Let me show you very quickly what question 1 and 5 look like so that you know. Sorry, question 4 and 5. So question 4, in general, or in every single one of the applications will say, in your application you spoke about and then we have in parentheses, review candidate's answer to question 1. This means that you have to go into the online application, which again you can find on the applications tab that we mentioned before, and you'll find in question 1, which will be marked as question 1, their answer. You review that. The reason for this is that on question 1, what we're asking is for them to further explore one of the different topics or themes that are covered through the summit. So for example, for the OECD, we have technology and innovation. This means that this candidate perhaps decided to talk about technology and innovation on their questions. And what you want to be doing is once you, before the interview, when you review the application of this particular applicant, you want to review this question to know that they were talking about technology and how, say, education is incorporating technology at the high school level to better prepare the future leaders of our countries. So if they talk about that, your question number 4 will say, in your application, you spoke about the incorporation of technology in high school level for public education. In your opinion, why is youth involvement important and how can we contribute to improve this particular issue? So again, just go back to the application, know what question, their answer to question 1 was, and that's how you can properly do this question. I recommend what I do is before I go into my interview, once I'm doing the review of the applicant, I write down general sort of the general context of their question 1 answer of their online application. That way, when I'm on the interview, I don't have to go back and forward. I know specifically the general topic, and that's what I say on question 4. So that's what that clarification was. Now, question 5. We recommend you to go in and do some research prior to the interviews. This means that if you're interviewing for OECD and we're asking them about the main working groups of the OECD and about the work and the focus of this year's OECD, we don't specify this on this question because we want to assess the level of experience or the amount of homework and prior research that the candidate did. So we encourage you guys to go online, have a look, and we can share these links on the documents that we have here in the guidelines. I'll put on the guidelines the links to the landing pages of each summit. And basically, each summit will have on their main page the top topics or themes or areas of focus that they're doing that year. So it's very easy to do, but it's very good for you guys to be familiar again with what the OECD is focusing on this year. Again, for example, the Y7, we're focusing on the future of work and technology and education and so on. So, you know, just very high level, just get an idea of what the specific summit is focused on this year. So, after this couple of clarifications for question 4 and 5, going back to the guidelines, you have the links to all the different questions for each one of the summits, OECD, World Bank, Y7, Y20. If you click on each one of these, we'll send you right away into the interview questions and the whole speech that we have prepared for you. Now, just to recap, we reviewed the profiles of the candidate, we reviewed the answers and their answer to question 1. Now we move ahead and we go into the assessment form. And I'll show you very quickly what that means again, just so that you are not lost in the process. This is the assessment form, if you're looking at my screen. Again, this is where you're going to have the names of the candidates and where you're going to be able to assess, put in the grade and the notes for each candidate. Now, you will assess each candidate based on a simple 1 to 5 scale, where 1 is the lowest, 5 is the highest. You will also add notes of each answer next to the score and general comment of your overall impressions of that candidate. Each interview will include 2 members of the panel. Therefore, you will have to debrief after each interview to agree on a mark and a joint comment. Again, one person is going to be facilitating the interview. Another one would be making the comments. At the end, you can edit and change the comments and the assessment. I recommend whoever is doing the facilitation to have just pen and paper and write down their assessments, scores through the interview. And at the end, when you're debriefing with your colleague, then go on and try to see if you can find an average or which assessment score to provide. I highly recommend for you guys to stop the call and then join a different call with your colleagues, just to avoid any situation where you perhaps didn't remove the candidate from the call, they stayed on, and then you start commenting on their assessment. We don't want to go through that embarrassment, so please just stop the call with the candidate and your colleague and start a new one with your colleague. Again, you can find on the guidelines the link to the assessment forms very quickly and easily. You just click here and it sends you to the live one. Each delegation has its own assessment form, so make sure you select the correct one. Again, I was mentioned about this. And the assessment rubric. Again, as I mentioned, the assessment rubric, this big document with lots of information, but that will become very helpful for you. You can review before or after the interviews just to make sure that you're assessing the candidates properly. Alrighty, so conducting the interview. This is very important because this is how we want to, if you follow these guidelines, this is how we're going to make sure that everything is efficient and well coordinated. So preparing for the interview. You have to connect with your colleague who you will be conducting the interview with over Skype and determine who will be adding the candidate to Skype as well as starting the call. Again, this is up to you, but I recommend doing, or the person responsible of adding the candidate to the Skype call to be the person who's facilitating the call. The candidate must be added to Skype at least 10 minutes prior to their interview. We recommend that only one member of the panel asks questions while the second member takes notes. If your name is bolded on the Excel sheet, then you are asking the questions in the interview. Again, if it's bolded on the interview schedule here, you are responsible of conducting the interview. I know that I've mentioned this like 5 times, but we always get a couple people confused with this one. Now, read the candidate's profile as instructed above. Have the interview questions, rubric, and assessment form at hand. I again recommend having these documents opened at the beginning of everything. Even before you connect with your colleague, have all the documents open. And just a reminder, you can find all of them on the folder that I shared. And if you don't, then just perhaps star or make one of these of your bookmark pages, these guidelines, because this is where you're going to find all the instructions and links to our live documents. So, introduction. Each interview should last around 20 minutes in order for you to have 10 minutes to debrief afterwards. The interviews are commonly scheduled 30 minutes apart from each other. We ask that you stick to the dialogue outlined in the interview questions document. Again, don't diverge from what we already typed on the outline, because that way is how we're going to make everything as consistent as possible. Questions and assessment. Make sure the candidate understands the questions before proceeding to their answer. It's always good to ask if they had any questions. If they want you to repeat the question, please go for it, but just make sure that you do it quickly. Assess their answers based on the rubric and keep the following in mind. First, your experience as a YDC delegate, as I mentioned before, that's what we want to gauge from the most. Second, the candidate's understanding of international organizations and the forum they are attending. Communication skills and presenting and the presence during the call, their knowledge and ability to explain the topics being covered in the questions, your impressions of whether the candidate will represent the YDC at the required standards, and if they appear to have YDC top skills. What do we mean with that? Again, as I mentioned on the pre-screening session of our training, the top skills that we're looking for in a YDC delegate, and these are again reflected on the rubric that we provided and the assessment criteria that I provided before, are interpersonal skills, cross-cultural competence, diligence and innovation and motivation, leadership and energy, teamwork, and technical knowledge. Again, this is just a very general and high-level guide of what we're looking for on a YDC delegate. Alrighty, so conclusion. If the candidate asks any questions for which you may not know the correct answer to, please ask them to email Sarah, our recruitment coordinator, at Sarah@YoungDiplomats. All candidates will be contacted by March 12th and 14th with the results. Please feel free to share a bit of your experience as a delegate at this point of the interview. Again, try not to open the conversation and ask additional questions or give the space for the candidate to highlight additional portions of the profile. It would be amazing for us to do this, but if we do this with one, we would have to do it with everybody, and it would not be consistent. So again, Feel free to share your experiences as a delegate, just to motivate the candidate, but don't go beyond that. We want to make sure that everything is as fair as possible. Lastly, debriefing. So once the interview is over, you will have to connect with your interview partner over Skype to agree on the scores given for each question, include additional comments, and write up a general comment impressions of the candidate. Just to review this part, if we go to the assessment form, we have space for scoring and notes for each single one of the questions. And again, at the end, on column N, you will see notes from panelists. I encourage everybody to have just a very general impression of the candidate on this column. It's very useful for us when we're doing the debriefing to review the general profile of that candidate. And lastly, selection of delegates. On Sunday, March 11th at 4 p.m., we will have a Skype call where the members of the recruitment panel and the YDC staff will determine the candidates that will be selected for the delegation. So if possible, we'd appreciate if you are available for this call. So please just go into your calendars, mark that off. At 4 p.m. on March 11th, we're going to have that session with all the panelists because we want to make sure that we hear the opinion of everybody and that we select the right people for the delegations. This session will take us, I would assume, around 45 minutes to an hour. I would say 45 minutes, closer to that, based on our previous debriefing sessions. The reason is that this time we're going to be selecting 3 delegations at once on this session. One alternate delegate will also be selected for each delegation, so just have that in mind when you're assessing. If you feel that that particular person, based on what you saw on with other candidates, is not as strong, but it would be a good delegate, just a few weaknesses, then also consider them and put on your notes that he could or she could be potentially a good alternate delegate. We do this, as most of you would know, because sometimes we would get somebody who will reject the offer, or perhaps won't be able to get their tickets, or simply won't make it to the summit. We want to make sure that we have an alternative there. And lastly, the recruitment team will contact the chosen delegates and take it from here. So that's where your job and your help will be over. Any additional support, if you'd like, you can reach out and let me know. That's my contact information, although everybody has it. And yeah, so that's the recruitment process. Just to recap very, very, very quickly, make sure you know where to find these recruitment guidelines. Everything that you need for the process will be found here, and you'll find all the right links to the documents that you're going to be needing. You can also find them again on the training session folder that I shared with you. However, if you lose this folder, you can't find it on the drive. You simply need to know where this document is. Copy the link, save it, store it somewhere safe, and you'll be able to find all the information you need for the process. And again, for those who are part of the pre-screening process, feel free to reach out again and ask any questions. But basically, we're going to be asking you guys or the next step will be for you guys to add your availability into the interview schedule. This will happen next week. And for YDC staff, please just be aware that today at 11:59 p.m., the applications are closing for Y20. And again, I'm looking for only YDC staff to run Y20 so that our alumni panel can support us with the other 3 delegations. However, if we get millions of applications for Y20, which might be the case, I might reach out to a couple of you individually of the alumni to invite you into the pre-screening process of Y20, which will happen next week, so starting Monday. However, in general, for YDC alumni, your job will start next week, first with adding your availability for the interview dates, and then during the weekend with the pre-screening process, and a week from that week, which would be the week again of March 3rd and 8th, we're going to be doing the interviews for the Y7, OECD, and WTO IMF. Just a closing comment before I jump into any questions. We're under quite a bit of scrutiny from the government this year because, again, we're hosting the Y7. It's not just us managing the delegation, but our amazing team, Sabrina, Nick, and Max. They're running actually their organizing committee of the Y7. So we have an extra scrutiny on top of what we usually do. So again, this is why we have changed our process. We have made the rubric we have standardized everything as much as possible because we want to make sure that everything is as open, clear, and fair for every single applicant out there. So yeah, that would be the training session, guys. If anybody has any questions, please go ahead and ask them.
Hey guys, this is Max. First of all, Diego, thank you so much for this really comprehensive overview of our processes. I really appreciate it, and I think I'll probably speak on behalf of the group. So my first comment is just a thank you to our alumni in particular. This is the definition of team effort, and to have everyone working together on this is really special, and I think is a hallmark of what makes YDC such an interesting not only organization but network of young people across Canada and in some cases across the world. So thank you. Diego, I had a quick question. Well, actually, two questions. The first is, what do we do in the case of a conflict of interest? So in case we know a candidate personally. And the second question is, and I apologize if you mentioned this and I missed it somehow, but the age-old debate in the interview process to open the video or not to open your video. So if you could just comment on those two things, that'd be wonderful.
Thanks, Max. All right, yeah, the first question is very good. Thanks for asking that. So everybody, if you know the person, and I would say even if it's just somebody you know from another friend, even if it's not a direct friend, I would recommend letting us know, and we will reassign that candidate. Most likely, either Sarah and myself will jump in right away and take care of that interview or that pre-screening profile. So again, if you know them, even just in a second degree, make sure that you raise your hand and reach out. I'll share with you guys my WhatsApp number so you can get in touch very quickly, and we'll take care of it so that we don't have any biases and so on here. About the video, we have considered not including the video as part of the reviewing process of the profile for the interview. However, from my experience and what we discussed within the recruitment team is that the video does provide you a very good indication of the level of interest, the time commitment that they put into the whole application process, their presence and their personality in a way. And it basically gives you a very good idea of what the candidate looks like in terms of their level of interest again and their profile overall. There's obviously a debate in there there's an opportunity to have a very easy way of discriminate systemically in the process. However, we have tried based on our 8-point criteria to avoid this and actually encourage or empower certain groups that might suffer from this to move forward into the interview process. So we hope that by doing the pre-screening process, there wouldn't be that issue at the interviewing process. However, again, just in terms of operational practicality, I think having the video as part of your review before the interview is very useful. Any other questions or comments?
Hi, Diego.
Yeah, hi, Diego.
I have a question, and that is regarding asking specific questions tailored to which the person, anyone who's interviewing for 2 delegations or for 2 delegations in that case.
Sorry, you cut off a little bit through your question, but what I gather is that there might be situations where a candidate will be interviewing for 2 different delegations. Is that the question?
Yes.
All right. So
Yes.
Although it might seem that would be the case, what we do before we open up the applications for pre-screening, I'm going to be identifying those candidates that have applied to more than 1 delegation. That's very common, actually, for Y7, OECD, and WTO, and World Bank, IMF. We're pretty much going to have the same delegates or applicants throughout the different delegations. However, what we do, once you guys or we all do the pre-screening process and we have our top 10%, we consider several factors to move forward to the interview process. The first one is, again, the diversity of the selection that we have, just to make sure that the final delegation has a diverse set of profiles. The second one is obviously making sure that applicants can only interview for one delegation. The way we determine this is based on their experience, their profile, and we determine whether that particular candidate it's better suited for, say, IMF, World Bank, if they're, I don't know, from a finance background, or just their career progression sort of demonstrated more interest towards those issues. There's a third, I guess, criteria, or a third element that we consider is the strength of the profile. So because of natural or for reasons of competitiveness, the Y7 would be the most competitive delegation, which means that if, say, John Doe applied for the 3 delegations, made it to the top percent of the 3 delegations, this means that he will only be considered for Y7. This is something that we will be determining ourselves in terms of how we're going to be allocating the candidates. However, we will not be considering the same candidate for different delegations. Obviously, it's important to mention the distinction between our educational delegations, the OECD, the WTO, World Bank, and IMF, which are not part of the organic structure of the international organizations, and our advocacy delegations, which, as you would know, engage a little bit further with governments and other stakeholders because they're part of the organic structure of the G20 and G7. So Y7, in case of the delegations they're going to be looking, obviously Y20, those are the delegations we're going to be finding perhaps the stronger profiles, but that might not be necessarily the case. Perhaps we're going to be allocating them based on their, again, interests. So perhaps we have a much stronger delegation overall in terms of assessment grades in the OECD, but it's just people that had a more OECD-like profile to the ones that we selected for the Y7. I hope that answers your question with good context.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. And there was another question there at the same time.
Yeah, hi Diego, it's Morel. Thank you for that really comprehensive overview. It makes things a lot easier to understand. But my question is whether, if we're scheduled for an interview and the person who's supposed to interview either doesn't show up at all or shows up late and we're not able to complete the interview in the time allocated, is there a strict cutoff in terms of the amount of minutes that we give for an interview? And is there anyone that we should contact in the event that someone doesn't show up? Right.
Yeah, great question. So I'll be, myself and Sarah, we're going to be available throughout the weekend of interviews. Usually what happens is that if you run into any sort of programming issues, just reach out to us. We'll connect with the candidates, see what's going on. But as a general rule, I mean, in my experience, this is the third year doing this, it's I think our absence rate is very, very, very low. You might have 1 or 2 candidates that will be late by a few minutes, but overall, as long as you add them to Skype in time, we won't run into these issues. But if you do, then what I would do, and we don't have a specific guideline for this, perhaps it would be good to add in the future, but I wouldn't conduct the interview if the candidate is late by 5 minutes. If he makes it before that, perhaps we can do it. Just acknowledge that you're running very short in time and that you're going to be moving forward very, very quickly. Part of the speech that you have on the interview questions does ask the candidates, as you will recall from your interview, to provide an answer within 1 minute. That can make the interview very, very quickly, actually. You will only run into a 20-minute interview where candidates go over that minute of answer, which happens every now and then. If you are late a little bit to the next interview, you can just let us know. We'll connect with the candidate, let them know that you're running slightly late. However, we're going to try to set up the interviews with enough time between each other. Usually there's 30-minute intervals between interviews, but we might give you, half an hour between interview and interview for you to make up for that lost time or so on. But again, if the candidate is late by 5 minutes, even if it's a top candidate of the interview process, I'm sorry, but it's something that we consider as very important, given that we're coordinating over 30 people for the panel, and simply the fact that part of the standards of a YDC delegate, we cannot consider somebody who's that late, right? So it obviously also reflects on your level of interest. So to be honest, we wouldn't be interested on going ahead and interview, even if it's the best interview you're going to be having at YDC, with somebody who's that late. But again, if
Cool,
you
thanks so much.
if you run into those issues, just reach out to Sarah and myself. We'll share our WhatsApp number so you can have quick access to us. Any other questions, guys?
Diego, just one more comment. And this is probably quite obvious to everyone, but having access, of course, to all of the interviews and assessment forms and guidelines and assessment rubrics should be very much internal and not shared externally. I think everyone knows that, but just to be 100% clear on that point as well.
True. Thank you, Max. Yeah.
I didn't think nobody else does.
Sorry?
Oh, I had a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Sorry,
Oh,
okay.
go for it.
To be clear, I had 2 questions. So we don't have the final interview questions just yet, right?
Not yet. You'll find you can find documents, and you'll see actually there are the questions from last year. We're gonna be editing them and changing them a little bit. In essence, they're gonna be pretty much the same, so you can get familiar with the questions. We're just gonna change a few details. There might be a change on the number of questions, but just based on number 3, which is the one for communications director and head delegate. But even if that change happens, it's going to be very minor, so you won't really see it reflected on the assessment form. The assessment forms will continue just as they are, and there will be no issues with that.
Okay. Do you know when we will get the final interview questions?
Yeah, I'm working on them today and tomorrow, so they should be early next week. I'll send out an email with asking you guys to input your availability into the interview schedule, and I would assume with that email to let you guys know that everything is good to go and that the documents are ready, and there's going to be no further changes with that.
Okay, great. Oh, and sorry, I should have said, just to echo Max, thank you, and thanks Sarah so much. Thank you, Sarah, so much for all the work you guys have done getting this all together. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Russ.
One more question.
Yeah, go for it.
So the opening speech suggests that all candidates answer each question in approximately 1 minute.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something we're planning on leaving in?
Yes, so it might seem that it's not enough to answer or provide a proper answer. We keep it that way because in our experience, people will be answering for more than a minute, but it transmits, I guess, a sense of urgency to move forward quickly and be concise. And that's what we want to ensure that we do. Given since we have scarce resources of time, running this process very quickly through just a weekend, we want to make sure that we keep to the schedule. And it's okay if they go over a minute. I wouldn't recommend you guys to cut them off and just move forward. Let them give you their answer, but by just stating that it's going to be within a minute, it in general gives them an idea of conciseness and urgency, and they'll provide you again a concise answer, I guess.
The only thing I wonder is whether that's the best way to encourage them to be concise, because as you say, nobody's going to answer the questions in a minute. There are 5 questions. If they actually answered them in a minute, the interview would only take 10 minutes. Maybe one suggestion in other kinds of interview processes I've gone through, where there's limited amount of time, often the interviewers will tell interviewees how many questions there are. Like, there are 4 questions. Some of them will take longer to answer than others. For the more straightforward questions, we encourage you to keep your answers as brief as possible, and then that might help leave time for the longer questions. My only concern is telling them to answer all questions in a minute when there are only 5 questions and some of them are complicated than others. It's sort of an unrealistic we might be encouraging them to ignore guidelines by asking something like that.
Right. Yeah, no, that's completely fair. It's something that we have contemplated in the past as well. But let's do something. Let me sit down with Sarah, see if we can come up with a different wording for that portion, which I think it's totally true. We can perhaps transmit a much better message. So let me work on that, and we can put together a different wording for the limit, for the time limit of the answers. Thank you, Russ.
Thank you, Diego. Again, I appreciate all the work you guys have done.
Thank you. Anything else, anybody? Cool, I'll take that as a no. So just a couple things to wrap things up. The first one, I think, and echoing what Max just mentioned, obviously it's very important for you guys, since we're opening up our process and how we do things, although you would know a certain portion of it as YDC delegates or alumni, but also, try not to share this information or the essence of the process with anybody out there, even if you're not assessing them. It's important for us to keep it as secret and internal as possible, just to make sure that there's no unfair advantage with other candidates in the future or in this delegation, given that the applications are still open. So please just ensure that this is something you keep to yourself, although we do encourage you guys to promote the delegations as much as possible. Invite friends directly, text them and let them know that they should be applying, and that even though you'll be in the panel, you won't be reviewing them, but that you want them to apply. That's something that we encourage. Just make sure that you keep it very secret, our process and what we're looking for. That's very important, to keep those 8 points to ourselves and the whole process as well. Again, this week I'll send out an email. I don't have a specific date just yet, but Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, the latest, I'll send out a follow-up email asking you guys to go online and put in your availability. I'll send out also a notification that everything is good to go in terms of documents, and we'll be determining who's going to be assessing whom. So either on that email or in a follow-up email later this week, I'll be letting you guys know roughly how many interviews and so on you're going to be part of. This is obviously determined based on the amount of candidates that we receive. Just as a reminder, Y20 is closing up tonight, and the other 3 delegations are closing up on Wednesday. So again, I'll notify you after that's done. I'll move as quickly as possible to allocate all the candidates for pre-screening and for interviews, just based on the rough numbers. Yeah, just a reminder of I'm recording this. Hopefully it will work. It's the first time I do a long recording session with QuickTime. But if everything goes well, it'll be recorded. I'll send it over so you can review any portion of our training session through the week. But again, just as a timeline or time-wise, use this week to prepare. Perhaps just allocate a couple hours through the week or next weekend to review everything we covered today, and ideally send over questions before the end of the week. I'll share again my WhatsApp, and I'll answer them before the interviews and the pre-screening process. And just lastly, if you joined a little bit later and did not type your name on the chat group, please do so now before you leave. That way I can just know who joined, because those who didn't, then that means that I need to make sure that they review the session online. Alrighty, guys and girls, thank you for everything. Thanks again for your interest and support with our process, and very much looking forward to working with you guys on this recruitment process and seeing the excellent delegations that we're going to be coming up with in the next couple weeks.
Thanks, Diego. Super excited. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.